is race an issue in the US?
Yes.
Yes,
Absolutely.
definitely.
And I guess I would kind of reframe the question. I don't know if Africans are treated differently. I think that white people in particular and broader Americans, they see us as Black people. So I think that we are, in terms of that distinction, and the way in which we're treated, it isn't all that different.
Because we grew up not really wanting to tell people where we're from. Well, I didn't really want to tell people where I was from, in fear of being mocked or being not related to. So even though I saw people that looked like me, I didn't feel like I was part of them, and I had to act more Black.
And as far as how we're treated differently, I think the images that are shown of Africans, even when I was younger, kids would ask me crazy things like, are you living with lions? Who? It's just like the images that are put out about Africans, I feel like is the way that we're treated. Does that make sense? Like, kids are not just walking around with flies on their nose. Like, no, we have homes. And I feel like the images that are portrayed of Africa affects how we're treated and received, if that makes sense.
There's such a lack of representation of Africans in the media. You see certain types of images, and even when we saw some color on the screen, it didn't necessarily represent us. And so I think that there's always been a yearning or lack of being able to see people that look like me, in not only on the TV, but also seeing, CEOs or executives, or even in the hospitals. There's just a lack of seeing images of myself across the board.
But in regards to Siham's last comment on tokenism, I feel like I represent that to like a T, in my life growing up in the States, as in through the education system, I was always the person who was in advanced courses. And then I was like, oh, well, you're not like the other Black people because you're super smart, so you're not like that. Or they would always talk about how I speak, be like, oh, well, you don't sound Black, or you don't sound African, because I trained myself right when I came to the States. It was imperative for me to learn how to talk in an American accent, because I was ridiculed for speaking in my African accent when I came.
And she felt comfortable to come to me and say, well, I mean, they have the same opportunities as you, and why is it that, they don't, you know what I mean? She's trying to say, it's safe for her to kind of come to me and say, well, why don't they push themselves to get to places where, and then she kind of went on to say, well, I grew up in the hood and I was really poor and I went to a really bad school, but I took this class that got me to where I am. And I'm like, look, there's just oppression that's history that they don't take the time to consider. And I'm like, you're missing that point of the struggle that the Black Americans have gone through.
So growing up, my parents taught my brother and I that we were different from African Americans, and they unfortunately had taken on this point of view that they're uneducated, they're lazy. They talk to us about African Americans the way some white people speak about Black people. It's so unfortunate. I've had to have lots of conversations with my parents to kind of unwind some of that stuff, and it goes back to what you were talking about, which is this lack of recognition of what these people have actually had to go through in this country. You cannot compare a self-selecting group of immigrants who have made a decision to come here, who perhaps had the resources or the education to be able to come to the US and make a way for themselves, to people who were enslaved and had to go through generations of wealth inequality. I mean, obviously I'm speaking to the choir here, but
I think there is a wedge between Africans and Black people, just because I think when Africans first immigrated to America, there's a language barrier already. And it's and these images that they feed us of Black people in America, those images of shooting and all this stuff that we see here in America, they see that in Africa. That's all they're feeding them. So of course they're gonna have those feelings towards Black people because that's what they're being fed, those images. Same as African images that are being forced on Black people is, okay, feed the hungry, everybody's starving. No.
I always knew there was like a contrast, right? I knew that I was very different from Black Americans, but I didn't understand like the history behind it and why. I just knew that I tried to leave my Africanness at home because I just wanted to assimilate to general American culture, not just like Black American. For me, it was just American culture, right? How do I come to school not smelling like spices because my mom's been cooking all day because everyone's making a comment about that? How do I, keep my parents from coming to chaperone because they have these thick accents and everyone's going to make fun of them, right?
So when I started reading the books and the history, it was kind of like starting to make me angry that they went through all of that. So it was like a learning experience. And then when I started experiencing racism at like, say 19, when I first tried to get a job, and the lady looked at me and was like, we're not hiring. And realized your sign says you're hiring, but of course there was nothing I could do about it. So I left. And the guy I was dating at the time was like, go back. I saw that they were hiring. I'm like, I'm not going back. And then 2 weeks later, he kept pushing me. He's like, no, you need to go back. They're hiring. I'm like, the lady literally looked at me and said, we're not hiring. So I went back and the general manager was there. He's like, wait, are you looking for a job? He's like, yeah, we're hiring. He's like, get her an interview right now. And right then and there, interviewed and ended up having to work with this lady that looked at me and said, we're not hiring.
Being called by another teacher, and she calls me, and I thought I was in trouble. And I just remember she took me to another room, and I've never been into this room before. And she sits me down and she says, I need to sign you up for this program. Since you're from Somalia and you're new to the country, and I have no idea where I am. And I'm like, what room is this? And she said, this is ESL. And I said, I'm not new to the country. I was born and raised here.
I like your hair. I switch up my hair all the time. It's like I get kind of annoyed with that. Is that your hair? Can I touch your hair? No, that's weird. Why are you touching my hair? I remember we had like a meeting and we were welcoming someone new to our team, and we just kind of went around the table and we had to say something interesting about ourselves. And I just went blank. I was like, oh, dang, I don't know what to say interesting. And my manager was like, well, Par always has interesting hair. That kind of let me know, like, you're paying a little too much attention to something that's an accessory for us.
Always having to correct the friends I made's remarks about how I look and how I talk, where they would either comment on my hair and say, oh, you change it so much. Like, how come you don't just use your real hair? Why is your real hair so kinky? It looks like pubic hairs. I got that remark before. I had a remark where one white girl asked me, how come your palm is white but the back of your hand is black? I was like, I mean, ask God. I don't know.
I'm just tired of just trying to survive this whole time. I don't even know. I feel like I don't know if we ever have a long-term joyful moment. You know, I feel like Black joy is so scarce. It's so scarce because we're always constantly having to survive. Even during this, we're still having to survive, yet tend to other people and make sure other people are okay and make sure other people understand us. And it's like, it's so irritating because you're like, you know, you can get mad about it. You get to the point where you're tired of just constantly being in the same headspace, surviving, being mad about something, fighting, and then in that whole circle, there's a moment where you're just vying for that moment of joy. Like, when are we going to be happy? Like, when are we going to look back on this and be like, oh, thank God we survived this, and now we can just breathe. Like, when can we just breathe?
I guess there was 2 girls, and they only caught one. So he's like, you look kind of familiar. And I'm like, I don't know why I would look familiar. And he's like, you run around Tukwila, huh? I was like, no, I don't generally come to these parts except to go to the mall. But I'm like, no. And he's like, and he just keeps asking me all these questions. And I'm like, look, sir, I don't even have a parking ticket on my record. I said, if you want to see my ID or look at the receipts in my car, like, feel free to ask. But like, I basically just asked him to flat out say what he's trying to insinuate.
One is when I travel, you end up taking a lot of cash with you because you don't want to be using your credit card when you go overseas. So I go to the bank and I'm taking a large sum amount, not a lot, but like less than 5,000, let's say, right? the lady is giving me a hard time and saying that this isn't your account, and I need to see, like, I need your signature, and I'm going to match it with the signature that you open the account with. And I'm already like losing it, and guess what, I'm going to look like that crazy Black woman who's shouting because you are telling me I can't take my money out of my bank, and doubting that this is my account.
I definitely code switch.
Yes.
Definitely. I think many of us do. We've been conditioned, since we came to this country, or we're, even if some of us were born here, like we've just been conditioned to be like everyone else. So because there's layers of things that separate us, right? And so it's like, at least if you quote unquote speak properly, right? Which, let me get into that. Then you'll be more accepted, and you'll be taken seriously, especially like if you want to advance your career. I was with a group of white people. We were sitting in a conference room, and these were people that I consider to be my friends. Like, we were more than just coworkers. Like, we hung out outside of work and stuff. And I was telling a story, and I was like, yeah, man, I was chopping it up with her the other day. And one of the white girls was like, what did you say? Chopping it up? What does that mean? I was like, girl, you know exactly what it means based on the context of what I was saying. There's always been this fear of being yourself, speaking up for yourself, defending yourself. I don't know about you guys, but at least for me, it's been like a crippling fear that I'm still working through.
I feel that so deeply. The way that you're talking about that, I feel that so deeply. I don't know if this is an immigrant thing, I don't know if this is being a Black thing, a woman thing, whatever, but I'm thinking like 10 steps ahead. Oh, if I do this is going to impact this, that's going to do this, that's going to do this, that's going to hurt me.
But just that experience of like, hey, I could work so hard, but I could just lose it with one bad experience is, it's exhausting because you always have to be on.
Situation where there was one situation, and I was in a meeting with some colleagues, and we were just talking about like a content development process. And I made a point about making sure the product managers were looped into the process. And for whatever reason, I left that meeting, and the perception was that I had stormed out of the meeting. I had not stormed out. There was a VP level meeting that I had to attend, and I was running late. And so I said, oh, I just realized I'm late for this meeting. So I left. But the perception afterwards was that I was very rude, in that I stormed out of this meeting. And I made someone cry, made one of my white colleagues, this white woman, cry, so it was over. I had this great track record, and in that one interaction, it was completely ruined.
I mean, I think when I think about my parents, and I think a lot of our parents who migrated here, their first priority was just surviving, right? So I don't think race was the first thing. My parents have experienced so much racism. I talk to my dad, and he'll tell me story after, my dad's a mailman, and he tells me story after story after story of just the blatant racism that he's experienced. And I've seen it. I met him on one of his routes once to bring him lunch with my mom, and right in the middle of that, we walk up to this white lady screaming at him, calling him an Iraqi, and saying all of these things because she thought my dad was stealing her mail. Her mailman was stealing her mail.
It's hard for me to just continue on, just keeping silent nowadays, just oh, I don't like it when this happens to me. I'm very vocal about that. So I think now, yeah, we're talking about race more at this age, but I feel like we clash when I'm saying that I want to stand up for myself instead of just okay, I'm gonna just ignore it and be quiet like you told me to.
But, I believe to be in this current company, you must be in therapy. It is now, so for me, it is a requirement. I'm in therapy now to make sure that I'm managing through my mental health. And I've also come to the realization that corporate America long-term will not work for me. I believe that even if I'm able to get to the level that I deserve to be at, I'm going to encounter more racism based off of the conversations that I've been having.
Yeah, I left my last job because I had to save my mental health, the one in Seattle. But yeah, it's this inferiority complex that's there. That's where I noticed when I got older, I had a lot of people telling me, you're doing good, you're doing great, you're doing so much, you're working too hard, oh, you're pretty, you're nice, they're reaffirming all these things that's inside of myself. But I never believed it because I grew up not trusting it or being told otherwise. And that's where I'm still in the phase of unlearning this.
I too have been doing like a lot of unlearning of like the notion of like black, like being black and having to be exceptional in order to like fit in. And like,
I didn't understand why I had such a notion, or I was so focused on being perfect and, you know, doing well in school. That's kind of something I'm sure all of our parents said, you know, you need to get a good education. That's going to be your way out. That's what you need to be focused on. And then you get positive accolades when you're doing well and when you succeed. And it kind of creates something in your mind where, okay, I succeed. And now we're in these positions where there's not a lot of people that look like us. And so you have the imposter syndrome where, should I even be here?
So in closing, my last question for you guys is, what do you have to say to the people who believe that race is non-existent? Because we're in 2020 and, you know, we're past that shit. Or, are you sure that was a race thing? Everything's not about race. What do you have to say to those people?
Read, learn about the history. If you don't want to read, watch a documentary. Start with 13. I don't know. Like we're in a day and age where we have access to so much. And if you're not taking the initiative to learn, that is a choice. It's not that there's a lack of resources. It's you making an active choice to not want to learn about someone else's experience. So you need to educate yourself.
Like if they're not loved ones, either then, like I feel like we're just tired. Like you just said, Google it. Google. Because we're not going to be teaching you all this stuff anymore. It's just like repetitive for us, years after years, decades after decades. Like, you know, if that's what they want to believe, then they just remain ignorant to the world and other people's perspective. And like, if they really are concerned about this really existing, it's hard to prove someone wrong hard to change someone else's mind when they're so invested in their beliefs. And honestly, like you said, Google, or else, you know, I'm sorry, we ain't talking.
Yes. I'm no longer talking to these people, so I give them to God. And I think that at this point, if you don't see the issues with racism in this country, God can love them, but I certainly don't have to deal with them. So that's my point of view on it.
Amen to that, because I feel like I've taken that same stance, Bukola, where I don't have like the time and energy, just because my energy is being sucked in like so many different directions. So I've kind of taken the stance of, it's not my duty to educate you or to like go through all of history and like explain it to you, or like explain my experience and so many of others over and over to you, you know. But I just don't understand why some people, it's so difficult to understand. If all these people have these experiences, if all these people are sharing like similar sentiments, you would think that like, there might be like an issue here, you know. It's so draining.
Yeah, I think the root of the issue is that people feel the need that they have to be right, instead of, how do I get this right, you know?
There's levels of racism as well. Like we have white friends, I'm sure a lot of us, and we can do our part to have those conversations with them and be willing to let them know what our experiences have been, which I do with a lot of my white friends. If I have a racist experience, I will tell my white friend, whether she or he is going to understand or not. I'll share my pain with you and say, I just got treated X, Y, and Z. And yes, there's been times where they're like, well, do you think that they were trying to, and I'm like, you know, no, they were not trying to do that, but I'm still having that conversation, and I'm sure it's uncomfortable for them to hear it, but I still have it, right? But if somebody doesn't realize there's racism, it's like, if you've never been in that situation, then you can't really talk, right? It's kind of like saying, I understand as someone that just lost a loved one. If you've never lost that, you know, a son or a daughter or whatever, loved one, you can't say you understand because you've never been there, right? So I feel like they can't talk until they've been in our shoes, and that's kind of difficult to be in our shoes because you've never been Black.
Berhan, what you got to say?
Sorry, I gotta unmute myself. Girl, I'm tired. I don't know. I I don't have much to add. I think everybody, stated it pretty well. At the end of the day, I think, yeah, I'm also one of those people I don't like to waste my breath too much. Like I've learned I'm no longer in the business of trying to change people's minds. And I don't think any of us should be trying to actively change anyone's mind. I think for me, I'll speak my truth when I need to, right? If I am having a conversation with somebody who's maybe resistant to some of my views and doesn't quite understand, I'm open to having an open conversation and just sharing my experiences, because how would you know if you haven't had those experiences? Like you're not going to understand. So like just shining some light on my experiences, sending resources, right? And I think and also I always maintain a level of just calm, because I never want to alienate a potential ally, somebody who simply doesn't understand and who was raised hearing things contrary to the truth, which is so more than common globally, especially in this country. And so I don't want to alienate somebody who, if they just had the knowledge, might become an ally, right? And so I just always remain calm. And then if they're not listening and they're choosing to still believe that, race isn't an issue after everything that I share with them, then I just politely walk away from the conversation, and maybe another ally will do the work, or maybe that person will never change. But we should just focus on what we can do. So just to protect myself, that's what I do.
Well, thank you guys so much for hopping on here with me, and that shit's a wrap. It's a wrap.
Yeah, thanks, T.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sierra.
Creating the space, and thank you for everyone for attending. This is super dope.